My name is Remy Boudreau. I'm 42 now, but this happened back in the fall of 2008, when I was a bit younger and a hell of a lot more certain about how the world worked. I've been a trapper my whole life, mostly working the Atchafalaya Basin here in Louisiana. It's a trade my father taught me, and his father taught him. You learn the swamp. You learn its rhythms, its sounds, its smells. You learn to read it like a book, and after 30-odd years of living and breathing that life, you figure you've read every page. You think you know every creature that slinks through the cypress knees, every bird that calls from the tupelo trees, every single thing that leaves a track in the mud. You get confident. You get comfortable. And that's when the swamp reminds you that you don't know a damn thing. I'm telling this story because it needs to be told straight, without any of the spooky music or fancy editing you see on TV. I'm not looking for attention. God knows the kind of attention a story like this gets you is the kind you don't want. People look at you different. They smile, but their eyes are saying you're either a liar or you've got a loose wire rattling around upstairs. I know, because I used to be one of those people. If some old-timer came up to me in a bar and spun a yarn like the one I'm about to tell you, I'd have listened politely, maybe bought him a beer for the entertainment, and walked away shaking my head. But I was there. My cousin Jean-Paul and our friend Thomas, they were there too. What we saw, what we went through, it changes you. It peels back a layer of reality you didn't even know was there and shows you something ancient and hungry underneath. So I'm just going to tell you what happened, exactly as I remember it. You can believe it or not. Honestly, most days I'm still not sure I believe it myself. Before I get into the thick of it, if you're new to this channel and you appreciate hearing these kinds of real first-hand accounts, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I share stories like this when I can bring myself to. And do me a favor, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from. It helps, knowing I'm not just talking to myself in a dark room. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little less empty. All right, let me take you back to that November. The air was starting to get a bite to it, and the nutria and beaver were prime. It was supposed to be just another trip, another week of hard work that we knew like the back of our hands. It started like any other. Our camp was nothing special, just a familiar spot we'd used for years. It was a small, raised spit of land, maybe a half-acre of solid ground, surrounded by a maze of black water and cypress. We called it the island, though it was really just a place where the mud decided to sit a little higher than the rest of the swamp. We had 2 heavy canvas tents, the kind that smell like mildew and wood smoke, no matter how many times you air them out. A fire pit in the middle, dug deep and ringed with rocks we'd hauled in over the years. Our boats were tied up to a couple of sturdy cypress roots, my 16-foot John boat with its temperamental outboard, and a couple of pirogues for getting into the tight spots. It was home, for a week at a time. The work was hard, but simple. You're up before the sun, the air so cold and damp it feels like it's seeping right into your bones. You fire up the Coleman stove for some gritty cowboy coffee, then you're in the boats, checking the lines. You spend the day hauling traps, resetting them, dealing with the occasional gator or cottonmouth that gets tangled up where it shouldn't be. The afternoons are for skinning and prepping the pelts, a bloody, methodical job that you do on autopilot, while you talk about fishing, or football, or nothing at all. Then it's dinner over the fire, a couple of beers, and into the tent by 9, because dawn comes early. That was the rhythm, a rhythm we'd followed for decades. But on this trip, from the very first night, the rhythm was off. The whole swamp was out of tune. Usually when the sun goes down out there, the place comes alive. It's a full orchestra of sound. Tree frogs, bullfrogs, crickets, cicadas, 1,000 insects you can't name. It's a constant, steady hum that you get so used to, you don't even hear it anymore. But that first night, as we sat around the fire, the silence was what you heard. It was a deep, pressing quiet, the kind that makes the little hairs on your arms stand up. JP, my cousin, he noticed it first. He was older, quieter than me and Thomas, and he had a feel for the swamp that went deeper than just experience. It was instinct. He stopped stirring the pot of jambalaya, looked out into the blackness beyond the firelight, and said, "Quiet tonight, ain't it?" Thomas, who was always trying to fill any silence, just laughed it off. "Too cold for the damn frogs, maybe." We all agreed that must be it. A cold snap was rolling in. It was a good explanation. It made sense. But down deep, in that part of your gut that knows things your brain hasn't caught up to yet, it felt wrong. The swamp wasn't just quiet. It felt like it was holding its breath. The second day started in that same heavy silence. The sun came up, but it was a pale, watery light that didn't seem to warm anything. As we took the boats out to check the lines, the feeling of wrongness grew. There were no birds. Usually the mornings were full of them, herons, egrets, kingfishers rattling along the bayous. That day, nothing. The sky was empty. The trees were still. It was like everything that could fly had decided to be somewhere else. Even the squirrels, which were normally a constant, chattering nuisance around the camp, were gone. The unease started to curdle into real concern when we got to the traps. The first dozen were empty. Not just empty, but sprung. Bait gone, but nothing in them. That's not unheard of. A clever raccoon or a small gator can sometimes manage it. But then we started finding the traps themselves damaged. These were conibear traps, heavy-duty steel. We found one bent into a U shape, the trigger mechanism shattered. Another was twisted, the thick steel frame warped like a piece of soft wire. I knelt down beside it, running my thumb over the distorted metal. A bear could do this, maybe. A really big, really angry boar could probably manage it. But there were no tracks. The mud around the trap was churned up, but there were no clear prints of a bear or a hog. JP came over and looked. He didn't say anything for a long time, just crouched there, his eyes scanning every inch of the ground. He finally pointed with his chin at a spot a few feet away. "Look there." I looked. At first, I didn't see it. Then my eyes adjusted. It wasn't a clear print, more of a long, deep depression in the mud. It was maybe 16 inches long, oblong, and deeper at what looked like the front. It wasn't a bear print. Those are wide, with 5 distinct claw marks. It wasn't a hog. Their hooves leave a clean, two-toed impression. This was just a big, wrong shape. "What the hell makes a track like that?" Thomas asked, his voice a little shaky. JP shook his head. "I ain't never seen nothin' that does." We spent the rest of the day on edge. Every snap of a twig, every splash in the water, made us jump. I kept getting that feeling of being watched, a primal crawl on the back of my neck that you can't ignore. I'd be rebaiting a trap, my back to the thick cypress stands, and the feeling would get so intense I'd have to stand up and spin around, my hand on the pistol I always carry on my hip. But there was never anything there, just the still, silent trees. We tried to rationalize it. It had to be a bear, we told ourselves, a big, old, mean one that had learned how to bust traps. The track must have been distorted by the water or the soft mud. We were just spooking ourselves because of the quiet. We kept saying it over and over, trying to make it true. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The swamp knew something we didn't, and it was scared. And that scared us more than any bent trap or weird track in the mud. That night, the second night, the tension around the campfire was as thick as the humidity. We kept the fire burning high, feeding it logs until it was a roaring blaze that pushed the darkness back a good 20 feet. We sat close together, our shotguns and rifles leaning against the log we used for a bench, within easy reach. Thomas was trying to break the mood, telling some long, rambling story about a fishing trip he'd taken the year before. He was right at the punchline when he just stopped. His mouth hung open mid-word, his eyes wide, looking at a spot in the darkness just over my left shoulder. "What?" I asked, turning around. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He just lifted a trembling hand and pointed. And then we all heard it. It started as a vibration more than a sound, a low-frequency hum that you felt in your chest cavity. Then it rose into a growl, a deep, guttural, rolling growl that was full of menace. I've heard every sound a swamp can make. I've heard the bellow of a bull gator, the scream of a panther, the grunt of a wild hog. This wasn't any of them. This sound had a resonance, a quality to it that spoke of a huge chest and powerful lungs, but it was also articulate. It wasn't just mindless animal noise. It felt like a warning. In a single, unified motion, all three of us grabbed our big maglite flashlights. JP clicked his on first, his beam cutting a sharp, white tunnel into the black wall of the cypress trees about 30 yards from our camp. He swept it back and forth, and for a second, there was nothing. Then the beam caught them. 2 points of light, shining back from the darkness. Eyes. They were high off the ground, way too high. I did the quick math in my head. I'm 6 feet tall. If I were standing out there, those eyes would be a good 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet, above my own. "Big damn bear," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking, standing on its hind legs. But it wasn't moving like a bear on its hind legs. A bear is clumsy, wobbly. It can't hold that position for long. This thing was perfectly still, perfectly balanced. The eyes didn't waver. They were a strange color in the flashlight beam, not the green of a cat or the red of a gator. They were a bright, burning amber, and they were too far apart. The space between them suggested a head wider than any bear's. JP slowly, silently, raised the 12-gauge he was holding. He didn't shoulder it, just held it at his hip, the barrel pointing in the general direction of the eyes. His voice was low and steady, but I could hear the tension in it. "That ain't no bear, boys." As if in response to his words, the eyes blinked. It was a slow, deliberate movement, not a frightened animal caught in a light. It felt contemplative. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. They didn't dart away to the side. They just vanished, as if a switch had been flipped. For a long moment, there was only the crackle of our fire and the sound of our own breathing. Then we heard it moving. It wasn't the sound of a 4-legged animal crashing through the brush. It was a series of heavy, rhythmic thuds. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of something massive, walking away on 2 legs. We stood there frozen for what felt like an hour, our flashlights carving useless holes in the oppressive dark. Nobody said a word. We didn't have to. The same impossible thought was screaming in all our heads. What in God's name was that? Sleep didn't happen that night. We sat up, back to back, guns in our laps, staring into the darkness until the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky. The third day was a blur of fear and grim determination. We had a long, whispered debate at dawn. The smart thing to do was pack up and leave. Abandon the traps, abandon the pelts, get the hell out of there and never come back. But we were trappers. We had money, good money, tied up in that steel and fur. And there was a stubborn, foolish pride at play. We weren't going to be run off our own lines by what? A strange sound and a pair of eyes in the dark. We couldn't even say the words for what we thought it might be. So we made a compromise. We'd do one more check of the lines, pulling every trap as we went. We'd work together, one boat, all three of us, no splitting up. We'd be loaded and gone by sundown. The work was slow and nerve-wracking. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The silence of the swamp was no longer just unnerving, it was actively hostile. We found more destroyed traps, some of them not just bent, but snapped, the thick steel springs broken clean in two. The sheer strength required to do that was something my mind couldn't fully grasp. We worked fast, barely speaking, our eyes constantly scanning the tree line. By late afternoon, we had all the traps loaded into the John boat and were back at the island. The plan was to skin the few animals we'd caught, pack the tents, and be gone before the last light faded. But the swamp had other plans. As dusk began to settle, bleeding purple and orange into the black water, the temperature dropped. A thick, cold fog started to rise from the bayous, clinging to the ground and weaving through the trees. It swallowed the sounds we made, deadening the clang of gear and the crunch of our boots. And then the smell hit us. It rolled in with the fog, a foul, gag-inducing stench that was thick enough to taste. It was a complex odor, a nauseating cocktail of wet, muddy dog, the deep rot of a carcass left too long in the sun, and something else, a sharp, coppery tang, like old blood or rust. It clung to the back of your throat and made your eyes water. We all froze, dropping what we were doing. "You smell that?" Thomas choked out. JP just nodded, his face grim, his hand already on his shotgun. The smell was coming from all around us, seeming to emanate from the fog itself. Then came the sounds. They started soft, a series of clicks, like someone tapping stones together, coming from the west. Then an answer from the east, a low woof, like a very large dog clearing its throat. They were communicating, they were coordinating, and they were closing in. We scrambled to the fire pit, kicking the embers back to life and piling on wood until it roared, a desperate beacon in the encroaching twilight. The fog swirled just at the edge of the light, a ghostly curtain hiding the things that were making those sounds. We stood back to back, forming a tight triangle, our weapons raised. The clicking got closer. The soft huffs and woofs were replaced by low, rumbling growls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands were slick with sweat on the wooden stock of my .30-30 rifle. This was it. The rationalizations were gone. The attempts to explain it away as a bear or a panther felt like a childish fantasy. We were being hunted. And then one of them stepped out of the fog and into the edge of the firelight. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. It was like a file that wouldn't open, an image so fundamentally wrong that the mind simply has no category for it. For a split second, the thought flashed. Man in a suit. A stupid, elaborate prank. But that was gone in an instant. The way it moved, the proportions, the sheer reality of it, this was no costume. It was a living, breathing impossibility. It stood on two legs, but they weren't human legs. They were digitigrade, bent backward like a dog's, with long, powerful thighs and heavy, knotted calf muscles. The posture gave it a slight forward stoop, but it was still immense, easily 8 feet tall. Its body was lean, but corded with slabs of muscle that were visible even under a coat of coarse, matted fur, the color of dark mud and old blood. The arms were too long for the body, hanging down almost to its knees. And at the end of those arms were not hands, not paws, but some terrifying hybrid of the two. 5 long, thick digits, but they ended in heavy, curved black claws at least 3 inches long. But the head, God, the head is what will always haunt me. It was purely canine, the long, tapered snout of a wolf or a German shepherd, lined with black lips that were pulled back just enough to reveal a row of yellowed, dagger-like fangs. Its ears were tall and pointed, swiveling independently to catch every sound. And its eyes, they were the same amber eyes we'd seen in the flashlight beam, but now, lit by the flickering fire, they held a terrifying, unmistakable intelligence. It wasn't the simple awareness of an animal. It was looking at us, at our guns, at our fire. It was analyzing, assessing. It took a slow, deliberate step forward, its strange, dog-like foot pressing silently into the soft earth. The firelight glinted off its wet, black nose as it sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. It tilted its head, a strangely familiar, canine gesture that was made monstrous by the context. It wasn't just an animal. It was a predator that knew what it was doing. We were frozen, 3 men locked in a primal state of terror so profound it felt like being encased in ice. The world had narrowed to the crackling of the fire, and the sight of this thing from the deepest, darkest corner of humanity's oldest nightmares. It raised its head and let out a low growl, and from the fog-shrouded darkness all around our tiny circle of light, other growls answered. We weren't just facing a monster. We were surrounded by a pack of them. The spell of paralysis was broken by Thomas. Fear finally boiled over into action, but it was the wrong kind of action. It was blind panic. He let out a strangled, high-pitched yell, a sound that was half rage and half pure terror, and he leveled his 12-gauge shotgun. Before JP or I could scream at him to stop, he fired. The roar of the shotgun was deafening in the enclosed space, and the buckshot tore into the creature's chest and shoulder from less than 20 feet away. The impact was immense. It threw the thing backward a step, a spray of dark fur and something wet flying into the air. It staggered, and for a glorious, hope-filled second, I thought it was going down. But it didn't. It caught its balance on those strange, backward-bent legs, lowered its head, and let out a sound that I will hear in my nightmares until the day I die. It wasn't a roar of pain, like a wounded bear would make. It was a sound of incandescent fury, a deep, guttural, wet sound that was part wolf's howl, part man's scream, and all hate. That roar was a signal. From the darkness around us, the growls erupted into a cacophony of savage howls and barks. The woods came alive with crashing sounds as the others started to move in. The creature Thomas shot ignored the wound in its chest, which was already seeping a dark, thick fluid. It locked its amber eyes on him, its fangs bared in a terrifying snarl, and it lunged. The speed of it was unnatural. It covered the 20 feet between them in 2 massive bounds. Thomas, fumbling to rack another shell into his shotgun, tripped backward over a stack of firewood. He fell hard, the gun flying from his hands. The creature was on him in an instant, one of its long arms swiping down. The claws, black and sharp as obsidian knives, tore through his heavy canvas jacket and the flannel shirt beneath, as if they were tissue paper. Thomas screamed, a raw, piercing sound of agony. That scream finally broke me free. JP was already yelling, his voice a desperate command. "The boat! Get to the boat! Now!" He was turning, bringing his own shotgun to bear on the darkness to our left. I raised my .30-30, the familiar weight of the lever-action rifle a small, cold comfort. I found the creature in my sights, the one mauling Thomas. I didn't aim. There was no time. I just put the bead on its massive shoulder and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against my own shoulder, the crack of the shot echoing the shotgun blast. The 180-grain slug hit the thing hard. It spun around with a guttural shriek, its arm pulling back from Thomas. That was the opening he needed. He scrambled backward on all fours like a terrified crab, clutching his shredded arm. But we had drawn the attention of the others. Another one, slightly smaller but just as fast, burst from the trees to our left. It was running low to the ground, a dark, fluid shape moving with terrifying speed. JP met it with a blast from his Mossberg. The shot caught it in the flank, and it let out a high-pitched yelp, veering off into the fog. They were flanking us, using pack tactics. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a random attack, it was a coordinated hunt. "Go!" JP screamed, shoving me toward the water's edge. "I'll cover!" We weren't fighting anymore. We were running for our lives. We abandoned everything, the tents, the traps, the coolers, a season's worth of pelts. None of it mattered. We half ran, half stumbled through the thick mud toward the dark shape of the John boat, the sounds of them crashing through the brush right behind us, their savage howls ripping the night apart. We fell into the boat more than climbed in, landing in a heap of tangled limbs and gear. The thin aluminum hull rocked violently under our weight. JP was already at the front, his knife out, frantically sawing at the thick rope that moored us to the cypress root. Thomas was curled up in the bottom of the boat, moaning, trying to put pressure on his arm, which was slick with blood in the dim light. My job was the motor. I scrambled to the stern, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get a grip on the pull cord. The air was filled with the sounds of their pursuit, the heavy thud of their footfalls, the snapping of branches, and their enraged, hungry snarls. They were almost on us. One of them reached the water's edge, just as JP's knife finally sliced through the last strand of rope. It was the big one, the one both Thomas and I had shot. It didn't even seem to notice its wounds. It stood there at the bank, its massive form silhouetted against our dying campfire, and it roared in frustration. Then it did something I would have never believed possible. It lunged into the water, churning the black, swampy shallows into a froth as it charged after us. The boat was drifting, agonizingly slow. I wrapped the cord around my hand and pulled. Nothing. Just a weak sputter. Come on, you son of a bitch," I muttered, my voice a prayer and a curse. I pulled again, throwing all my weight and terror into it. The motor coughed, caught for a second, then died. The creature was closing the distance. It was deeper now, the water up to its chest, but it was still coming, its powerful arms paddling, its head held high, those amber eyes fixed on us. It swiped at the stern of the boat. I felt the impact shudder through the hull and heard a screech of metal on bone as its claws scraped down the aluminum side, missing my leg by inches. I gave the cord one last, desperate pull. The engine roared to life, loud and angry, and the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I didn't even think. I jammed the throttle forward and slammed the gear shift down. The boat lurched forward, throwing us all against the seats. The sudden acceleration created a wake that washed over the creature, and it sank back with a furious gurgle. We were moving. We were away. I didn't dare look back. I just gripped the tiller, my knuckles white, and pointed the nose of the boat toward the main channel. The howling followed us. It wasn't just one or two voices anymore. It was a whole chorus of them, a symphony from hell, echoing across the water. It was a sound of pure, predatory rage, a promise of what would have happened if they had caught us. The sound didn't seem to fade with distance. It just chased us, relentless and terrifying, until finally it was drowned out by the steady, reassuring roar of our own escape. We were alive, but we had left a part of ourselves back on that island, in the mud and the blood and the fear. We finally reached the public boat launch sometime around 3 in the morning. The parking lot was empty, lit by a single buzzing mercury vapor lamp that cast long, distorted shadows. The transition from the primal terror of the deep swamp to this mundane little patch of civilization was jarring. It felt like stepping between two different worlds. We were a mess, covered in mud, soaked in swamp water and sweat. Thomas was pale and shivering, not just from the cold, but from shock. He was still clutching his arm, and the makeshift bandage we'd made from a torn t-shirt was soaked through with blood. There was no discussion about what to do next. I drove my truck like a bat out of hell to the small regional hospital in the nearest town, about 40 minutes away. During that drive, under the harsh glare of the dashboard lights, we cobbled together our story. It had to be a bear. A big, freakishly aggressive black bear. Maybe rabid. It was the only explanation that wouldn't get us locked in a padded room. We knew how thin it sounded, but the truth was simply not an option. Who would believe the truth? We'd be a laughing stock, the crazy Cajun trappers who cried wolf, or in this case, something so much worse. At the emergency room, the story worked, sort of. The nurse on duty, a tired-looking woman who had probably seen it all, took one look at Thomas's arm and immediately got him into a treatment room. A sheriff's deputy showed up a little while later, a young guy with a notepad and a deeply skeptical expression. We told him the story. We were packing up our camp. A big bear came out of nowhere, charged us. Thomas fired, but it just made it mad. It swiped at him, and we shot it again before it ran off into the woods. The deputy wrote it all down, but his questions were pointed. "A bear did that?" he asked, looking at the deep parallel gashes in Thomas's arm. "You said it was standing on its hind legs the whole time?" We mumbled something about how it all happened so fast. "And you shot it twice? Once with a shotgun, once with a rifle, and it just ran off?" We nodded. He sighed, flipping his notepad shut. "All right, fellas. We'll have animal control and a game warden go out and take a look in the morning. But I gotta be honest, a bear acting like that, this time of year, it's unusual." We just nodded again, too exhausted and shaken to argue. We knew they wouldn't find anything, or if they did, they wouldn't know what they were looking at. The doctors were more focused on the physical damage. They cleaned Thomas's wounds, gave him a tetanus shot, and started him on a painful series of rabies injections, just in case. The attending physician said the wounds were definitely from a large predator. 4 deep lacerations, clean and parallel. "Consistent with a bear claw," he said, and we latched onto the word consistent like a lifeline. It was a piece of official validation for our lie. They stitched Thomas up, gave him a sling and a bottle of painkillers, and sent us on our way just as the sun was coming up. We drove home in silence. The only proof of our ordeal was Thomas's bandaged arm, the claw marks on the back of my boat, and the hollowed-out look in our eyes. We had lost thousands of dollars in gear and pelts, but we all knew, without having to say it, that we had gotten away cheap. The weeks that followed were a waking nightmare. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were filled with amber eyes and the sound of that unholy roar. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering, the phantom smell of rot and wet fur in my nostrils. I took to sleeping with a lamp on and my 30-30 leaning against the nightstand. Every creak of the house, every time my neighbor's dog barked, I would be wide awake in an instant, my hand reaching for the rifle. The world felt different, thinner. The comfortable reality I had lived in my whole life now seemed like a fragile veneer, and I had seen the raw, terrible truth that lay beneath it. The 3 of us, we didn't talk about what happened. Not really. We'd see each other, nod, ask about family, But the subject of that trip was a black hole we all carefully navigated around. It was a shared trauma, but one so strange and isolating that speaking its name felt like it would give it more power. It changed us all. JP, who had lived and breathed the swamp his entire life, sold his trapping license the following spring. He never went back out there again. He told people he was just getting too old for it, but I knew the real reason. He'd seen something that broke his connection to the place he loved. Thomas healed physically, but the scars on his arm were a constant reminder. He got quiet, lost his easygoing nature. About a year later, he took a job on a pipeline crew way up in North Dakota. He said the money was too good to pass up, but we all knew he was just trying to put as much distance as he could between himself and the Louisiana swamps. As for me, I tried to go on as normal, but it was impossible. The fear had taken root. I sold my traps, too. The thought of going back out there, into those dark, quiet places, alone. I couldn't do it. Late at night, sometimes, fueled by a couple of beers, I'd sit at my computer and type words into the search bar that I felt ashamed of. Louisiana swamp monster. Dog-headed creature. Rougarou. That last one, the old Cajun legend, the werewolf of the swamps. I used to think it was just a scary story to tell kids. Now, I wasn't so sure. Then I stumbled onto other stories, accounts from all over the country, all over the world. People describing the same thing. Tall, canine, bipedal creatures. They had a name for it. Dogman. Finding those stories was both a comfort and a terror. It was a comfort to know we weren't the only ones, that we weren't crazy. But it was terrifying to realize that this wasn't an isolated thing. These creatures were real, and they were out there. I stopped laughing at those Bigfoot shows on TV. I stopped being a skeptic. You can only be a skeptic until you're the one standing on the edge of the firelight, staring into the intelligent eyes of something that shouldn't exist. I don't know what they are. Are they some undiscovered species? A government experiment gone wrong? Something supernatural? A demon from the pit? I don't have the answers, and I don't want them. All I know for sure is what I saw in its eyes. It wasn't an animal driven by instinct. It was a thinking being. It used tactics. It set an ambush. It hunted us. And that is the most terrifying part of all. I'm telling this story now, all these years later, because I feel like I have to. People deserve to know that the world isn't as safe and understood as they think it is. You sit in your well-lit homes, in your quiet neighborhoods, and you believe the maps are all filled in, that every animal has been discovered and catalogued. It's a comfortable illusion, but there are still dark places on those maps, places where the modern world hasn't fully reached. And in those places, ancient things still survive. Things that have been here long before us and will likely be here long after we're gone. This isn't meant to be some scary campfire story. This is a warning. If you spend time in the wild, learn to listen to it. I mean, really listen. Pay attention to the baseline sounds, the normal rhythm of the place. And if that rhythm suddenly stops, if the woods go dead silent, it's not for no reason. It's because every animal out there, from the smallest cricket to the biggest deer, knows something you don't. They know a predator is near, a true apex predator that they all fear. And when that happens, you need to trust that silence. You need to pack your gear and get out. Trust that primal feeling on the back of your neck, that little voice in your head that says something is wrong. That instinct is a gift from our ancestors, a survival mechanism honed over thousands of years of being hunted. Don't rationalize it away. Don't tell yourself it's just the wind. Listen to it and leave. I'll never have closure. I'll never know for certain what those creatures were or why they decided to hunt us that night. I just have the memories burned into my mind like a brand. The foul stench that rolled in with the fog, the sound of Thomas screaming as those claws tore into him, and above all else, the image of that thing standing in the firelight, its head tilted, looking at me not with the simple hunger of a beast, but with the cold, calculating intelligence of a killer. It was looking at me the way a man looks at a piece of meat he is about to butcher. That's the image I can't shake. Sometimes, even now, I'll be driving down a dark country road late at night. My headlights will sweep across the tree line and catch the reflection of a deer's eyes, and for a terrifying, heart-stopping split second, my mind plays a trick on me. The deer isn't on 4 legs. It's standing up, tall and monstrous, its head cocked to the side, just watching me drive by. And in that moment, the fear is as fresh and as sharp as it was that night on the island. My hands grip the steering wheel, my foot presses down on the accelerator, and I just drive faster, trying to outrun a memory that will be chasing me for the rest of my life.